now. So you will probably get a little thing saying you're happy for me to record. Right, okay, so let's get started. So this short webinar, welcome everyone, first of all. Um, this is very much a sort of an informal chat and conversation where I really want to focus on a slight sort of change in how we look at and understand weight loss and weight management. Um, Really, we sort of want to focus on what the science says about losing weight. So I probably will be talking for about sort of 30 minutes. Feel free to kind of comment in the chat box or ask questions throughout. And then there will be a sort of a big focus on Q&A at the end. I'm hoping to round up in about 40 minutes. I know that everyone's busy and it's kind of in the middle of the day. We all got stuff to do. And I will stop recording when we get to the questions as well. So do kind of, note down your questions in the comment box. So I'm just going to mute everyone. Yeah, if you can just make sure you're muted. Actually, Maggie, sorry, I think you're on if you just want to mute yourself, I might be able to do it for her. Hi, Maggie, can you hear me? Okay, you're on mute. Perfect. Okay, so let's get started. So the focus on this, I know there's been kind of lots of different titles flying around, but it's quite a difficult concept to explain. So, but what I want to do is sort of almost bust the myths that we sort of tend to think around weight loss, which actually is usually for most people that if you fail to lose or maintain the weight that you want to be, it's, most people blame themselves. They feel like they just can't stick to something, or that they are too greedy, or that it is like their favorite foods too much. And I really want to sort of challenge that thinking, because what we know from the research is that what happens is that there's real physiological things kind of going on, and whilst that's still occurring in the body, it actually makes it very, very difficult to lose weight. So, just to give you an introduction, I'm Linda Albinson. I'm a nutritionist and functional medicine practitioner. I run a online and London-based clinic called Advanced Nutrition. And in fact, I have a couple of sort of girls that work with me as part of the team, and I'll introduce them sort of at the end of this as well, so you can kind of get to know them. So I've called this sort of, why, get unstuck. And it's really because what I find is most people sort of have various things that will come to us and say, they will either say that they're just simply not losing weight anymore. They're doing all the right things. They're doing all the stuff that used to work. They feel like they're restricting. They feel like they're being good. But yet the weight sort of is creeping up. And often these are women over 40, but of course, could be any age and can be any sex as well. And a lot of people feel like they tried keto, they tried intermittent fasting, they may have done Zoe, but they're still not where they want to be. And of course, we live in a world where actually it's just really confusing to understand what we should be doing. So a lot of people are flitting from one thing to another. And that can especially be the case when someone may have done keto, which of course is a kind of low carbohydrate diet, and then moving on to fasting, and it's sort of backwards and forwards, and they might still eat high fat because they've been on keto, but kind of, or maybe even low carb in the evening, but not low carb at other times of the day. So things are a little bit of a mess. And we all need a little bit of clarity and what we should be doing. And I should add a little bit of comment on that sort of women over 40 as well, is that often, of course, we blame the menopause and hormones. And whilst that is relevant, the menopause doesn't actually need to impact your weight at all. Typically, however, we tend to have a worse metabolism as we get older, which often coincides with that time. Right. Okay. So I just wanted to also hear if anyone wanted to share just in the chat box whether that's you, whether you feel like I'm completely stuck, why is it not working? I'm doing all these things. I'm trying all these diets, or I'm barely eating anything. If you feel like that's you, and if I can work, I even have to get the chat box open, which I can. So if anyone wanted to share that, and then if you're happy to share that, we can also sort of discuss that at the end as well. So feel free to add that in your chat box. Right. So what the focus of this presentation is this sort of theory, I guess, that I'm presenting, is that we are going to talk about, why the thinking is wrong. But then I want to give you these sort of three key facts, which of course are quite sort of basic because we've got a very limited time. But they are very key and foundational principles that will get you started on some of the really key points. And as we're coming into holiday season, they become a little bit extra important. But also, it's important to understand that holidays are for enjoying themselves. We're very much about enjoying life in our clinic, because we think that not only should your life be enjoyable, but also food should be enjoyable. But we just need to correct these things that kind of occurring in the body. So we never want someone to kind of restrict lots on holiday, but we want people to be able to feel sort of satisfied with less when they go on holiday. So Q&A, as I mentioned at the end, where you can unmute yourself if you wish, or you could just add some comments in the box. And then at the end, I will also just let you know what to do next if you wanted a bit more help with your specific case. So here's the old approach versus our new approach. So the old weight loss approach theory, most people will be very familiar with this. It's about eat less foods, just resist your temptations. Less fun, of course, is the outcome of that, or even really severe restrictions, such as 600 calories a day, for weeks or even months, which is, of course, even quite dangerous. And those type of diets tend to actually program the metabolism kind of incorrectly, so to speak, because of course they feed, binging. And often we can almost trace back, for those who have dieted a lot in their lives, we can often trace back their start of their dieting from that first, severe kind of restriction, when you first sort of discovered that actually if you ate less, you can sort of lose weight. And it just brings, that sort of swinging and the yo-yoing, and kind of just really makes that quite stuck, because you just constantly need to sort of diet again. So yeah, lots of you might be familiar, and kind of feel a bit like, yep, this is sort of my thinking, or how I think of how I should lose weight. And again, you can sort of add some comments in the chat box. So our approach and how we want you to think about weight loss, and we're very much about weight management. Something's got to be sustainable if it's an actual, weight loss approach. And what I want to sort of highlight as well is that, for often I hear people say things like, how do some people just eat anything and just effortlessly sort of stay slim? Well, this is how, because their metabolism is sort of healthy. So with this new science-based approach, what the outcome is that you will want less food, you will have less cravings, and you'll be thinking less about food, and you'll just have that ability to be able to say no, thank you, not rather than having to say yes to everything that's kind of offered. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but actually we're bombarded with, this is quite old research now, so it's probably doubled, since the age of TikTok and the rest. But we bombarded with about 200 messages of, eat this every day, in terms of adverts. So this is, we might look out, see a billboard, and it's something delicious on that billboard. So, imagine if you're having to resist 200 times a day, or with social media, probably 400 times a day, that you're having to say no, internally you're going, I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to have that. It's sort of unreasonable, really, to think that if we really enjoy those foods, we really want those foods, how are you going to be able to say no to those all the time? So, that's what we want to build. We sort of build a body and a brain that doesn't need to want everything that's presented to it. And of course, then life can remain fun, because that's one of the main hurdles for most people, is just like with any, addiction, the life without this thing, whether that's croissants or whether that's wine or whatever it is for you, that is the one thing that you feel like you just couldn't live without it, because life would be worthless. And we all have, something like that, or even coffee. And I would like to challenge that to say that actually with all of those things, once we sort of get them almost, once we get this, it's almost like an addiction. So once you've kind of broken the cycle, you actually don't enjoy them in the same way. And it's that kind of myth busting. So, of course, this approach is easy and sustainable, and it's an anti-diet, but it's a slow approach because rather than going on a crash diet or losing weight really quickly, it's an approach where you make some tweaks, allowing that diet to be a healthy weight diet, meaning that long term, you don't need to diet, you don't need to think about it. But of course, it's not something that you'll lose sort of kilos and kilos and kilos overnight, which is the way that, we can sort of program our metabolism wrong. So what is metabolism? When I talk about metabolism, what we're referring to really in this context is that we're really talking about insulin, which a lot of people are familiar with from a lot of the sort of diet, like the keto diet, for example. So with the keto diet, they are on the right path. It's about correcting the same thing that we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to be talking about, but it just slightly lacks the full, first of all, it's very extreme, of course, and anything extreme is going to feed the yo-yoing. But also it fails to sort of have a sustainable long-term plan, unless you wanted to eat a keto diet for the rest of your life. What are you meant to do with that, afterwards? And also because it's so extreme, it tends to feed eventually that sort of feelings of deprivations if that has not been dealt with. So insulin, which I'm going to explain to you in the next slide, as simplified as I can, why is insulin a problem? So insulin is a hormone, which just means it's a kind of a messenger. And insulin is very key when it comes to the body deciding whether to store energy or whether to burn it. So we're constantly consuming and balancing this sort of, energy from all the food we're eating, of course. So, we get hungry, we'll eat some food. The body might decide to, spend it, or it might decide to store it. And that's that kind of, balance, that insulin. It's not the only thing that decides, how hungry we are or how much we need to eat or what we do with it, but it's a really key hormone, and I'll show you why in 1 second. And so insulin resistance is what we call a metabolic disease. And you may not even really have heard of metabolic disease, which is surprising, since really it's if someone has obesity, they have metabolic disease. It would be very unusual, although it's possible to have obesity without metabolic disease. And metabolic disease includes also things like, high blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a real epidemic in the West, and I'm going to show you how this works. So insulin resistance is to do with this process here. So this is the science of kind of metabolism. So we eat sugar or sugar-like food, and that then drives up the blood sugar. That's normal. So we eat sugar, it ends up in the blood. So that blood sugar then drives up insulin. Then the insulin becomes less effective because the body becomes resistant to it. And this is when we have a disrupted metabolism. So this is obviously hugely kind of simplified, and I think this is the best way to sort of describe it so that people can understand it. It can be really difficult to simplify something sometimes. So a disrupted metabolism is a problem. When our metabolism is disrupted is when we will feel that we can't stop eating something, you cannot lose weight, you will have endless cravings, you will feel like you can't live without whatever your favorite thing is. I always describe it as an addiction because it has a very similar, almost, the same pathway in the brain. The brain is quite basic when it comes to these kind of need more, want more, sort of dopamine driven, brain mechanisms. And the brain doesn't really care if that's coffee, if that's alcohol, or any other thing that we can be addicted to. And if anyone's ever sort of smoked or been a smoker, you will know that once you've quit cigarettes aren't nice. But when you're addicted to cigarettes, there's an illusion that cigarettes taste amazing or they do all this great stuff for you. But of course, someone who's never smoked will think you're mad because we know that cigarettes don't taste good and they don't give you anything other than a very empty wallet. Does anyone have any questions about this process? Then you can also pop comments now while you still remember in the chat box. I'll take a little look at that now to see, make sure that there's nothing there that I'm missing. Yeah, okay, yeah. Maggie's saying, yeah, start creeping up with the weight, not really following a diet, just being healthy. Mary's saying that's me 100%. If anything about this process, I'm hoping that when I'm simplifying this process here for you, that this is kind of triggering something that, in terms of your understanding around this. And also a lot of you will also be familiar with this sort of weight gain around the belly. Now, this is really key with this because it's a real hallmark of insulin resistance. And I'm going to show you an image that's hopefully there. Yes, it is. Okay, so this isn't the best image. I'm not very good at this, doing this in Canva. But what I'm trying to depict here is this sort of spectrum. And this is part of the problem and this is part of the reason why you've never heard of metabolic disease, because NHS doesn't care about this, if I'm honest. What, your health, what your GP and your doctors will care about is diabetes. Diabetes is the end result of being, having insulin resistance that has been unmanaged and is continued to escalate. That can lead to diabetes type 2, not type 1. It's not on this image because once you have diabetes, you'll be in the medical system and you'll be looked after. Now, what we're all about is, first of all, why wait till you're diabetic? It's an incredibly difficult thing to reverse on a mindset level once you actually get to that point. The earlier, of course, you kind of nip this in the bud, not only the healthier weight will you be, but also the better you will feel. You'll have more energy, you'll have less depression, you'll have less hormonal swings. There's just so much with our kind of modern lifestyle and health that is relying on this. And in fact, we know from research that this picture, this sort of insulin problem is also associated with dementia and, of course, cardiovascular disease. That's sort of what, is linked with cardiovascular disease is this problem with insulin. So at the bottom here, you will see this is sort of children. How children can just go for hours and hours without eating. They eat when they remember. You have to remind them to eat. They might be hungry, but they still don't really feel like eating. They're very sort of just going with their sort of physiological instinct to eat, but equally, if it's not important at that time, they can sort of just take it or leave it and nothing really bad happens. Although kids are quite prone to, I guess, blood sugar crashes, but whether that's also partly that they need energy often, but also partly because we feed them a lot, snacking a lot. So this is what we call metabolically healthy, this at the bottom here. This is how most people start off their lives. And then due to the modern diet, which is just really, really rife in not only sugars, but real high glycemic food, because that's essentially processed food. So depending on when you're sort of introduced to these foods, and you will see this in children, for example, who drink a lot of sweet drinks, is that they might start to get a little bit of a belly, even though they're children. And likewise, someone who's never been introduced to, say, high sugar food, for example, might never really experience that. So this can sort of begin to happen at any age. And we know that how our insulin sort of sensitivity, how our body deal with insulin tends to get worse with age anyway, just simply because we're getting older. So we're talking about sort of real old age. And actually diabetes type 2 used to be called, at least in Sweden, used to be called old age diabetes because it used to just sort of occur as people lost the ability to really have good insulin. So insulin has a really important job in clearing sugar from the blood, but it's clearing it by telling it to go into the cells where it's used to be burnt. So that's the really important kind of mechanism there. When that sort of fails to happen very effectively, the body has to produce extra insulin because it's panicking and needs to get that sugar away from the blood where it's really harmful. And too much insulin uh, that's when the problems start to occur. That's when you start to feel like you can't lose weight. It totally blocks weight loss. But you'll see, of course, on this sort of spectrum here that you'll start to recognize a lot of these, symptoms as very typical in the general population, of course. So often it starts with young people, crashes of energy. And when I do a lot of glucose tracking, young people tend to be experiencing that more than anything. So they'll have a lot of crashes because they're having too much sugar and it's just causing, this sort of, peaks and troughs in blood sugar. They might have, they might not be able to go long enough between meals, for example. Someone who has a very healthy metabolism can comfortably go 5 to 6 hours without eating and also without really then thinking about food. Hunger should really just feel like a bit of gnawing in the stomach. It shouldn't feel like a complete crash where, you can feel your mood changing just like that in the space of a few seconds almost. Your body should be able to switch to burning that fat and burning that stored energy seamlessly without you really noticing, without kind of being a carb burner, without needing just immediately more carbohydrates because you just can't switch to that sort of fat burning. And this can really start to then keep people in that cycle. So, you're having too much sugar and you're getting these crashes and your body's not able to switch quickly into burning fat. So you need more carbohydrates. So you become this sort of almost like throwing, not that I really know how to start a fire, but, you kind of need this little, paper or sort of bits of thin wood, to kind of get the flames to go like that. But then to sustain this nice burning fire, you need the big logs. So it's a bit like that. And then I would say most people that we see are somewhere between, in the sort of 40 plus would be in where it says trending insulin resistance. So they've gone slightly beyond the sort of having, blood sugar crashes, and they may be a little bit more aware that, having less, often people have slightly less sugar in their diet. Of course, people who come to see us might not be the general population. As the Zoe results indicate as well, is that often people that come to see us are quite health conscious and they've made a lot of changes recently. Where they might not be sure whether is it the menopause, is it they're eating quite healthily, they're a little bit confused because they're still eating sort of high fat or low carb sometimes not, so a lot of confusion going on. But the thing about this insulin is that because it tends to creep up with age, just kind of naturally, you might be more careful with your diet, but unless you've done something a little bit more drastic to really bring that down, it might constantly be sort of hovering and in the higher end. And we see this a lot, I would say, where people actually have made lots of changes and they're eating healthily, but just haven't been able to really bring that down. It takes a lot more, a slightly more drastic approach temporarily to really bring that insulin down, and then you can kind of maintain it in a completely effortless sort of way. So insulin resistance, in the sort of technical sense, would be when you're just before diabetes, and this is when NHS have started to pay a little bit of attention. Anything other than this, I will say your blood sugar is fine. At this point, you might have raised cholesterol, sometimes quite a bit. You might even have high blood pressure. This does come, this is slightly more complicated and has other factors as well. Quite commonly, people might have a bit of joint pain. Often, if someone is 40 plus, they might blame it on previous injuries or, sitting too much or not enough exercise. But it might be multiple joints or just generally feeling quite inflamed, or it might come and go a lot. So you might wake up with pain one morning, and even though you haven't done anything sort of differently, and it might become quite chronic. So of course, some people will need knee replacements, etc., at quite a young age. You might have gallstones, general gut issues, digestive issues, and of course, not being able to lose weight, no matter what you're doing. Again, if you sort of can resonate with any of this and are happy to share, you can just sort of put something in the chat box. So I don't know if you can see my marker, but I'm kind of just circling this where it says metabolically unhealthy. So you'll notice that I kind of keep referring to this as sort of metabolism and metabolically. So we use these sort of words kind of interchangeably quite a bit. So, metabolism, we tend to think about, fast metabolism or slow metabolism. And then we have sort of metabolically healthy or unhealthy. Well, this is when the system that decide, that kind of regulates how fast you burn energy. That's, that system, we refer to that, to that as a sort of metabolic system. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, this is a complicated thing to get your head around and to try to explain. Of course, the body is very complex, so nothing is ever that sort of straightforward. Right, so that's the process. So if that's you and you find yourself somewhere, not at the bottom, we want you to be at the bottom. When you're at the bottom of that sort of chart, you will not have constant cravings and you will not have the urge to eat all the time or think about food all the time. Of course, we all have different appetites. That I do believe that can be quite genetic. I mean, you can see in children, some are really, really enjoy their food and some are really can sort of take it or leave it. It's always an element of that. But that's not to say that, a little bit of change in different appetites, that's not going to kind of cause you to kind of constantly put on weight. More than anything, you probably then be almost the same weight your whole life. So you might start off with being, not stick thin, and you might kind of remain that sort of size, throughout your life. So you might just always be a little bit, and that's okay. That's not an unhealthy state, and that, you can maintain, that's you, and we should sort of feel happy with what we are. And most people do. Most people feel unhappy when we just feel a weight that doesn't feel like us. Most of us would just want to feel like us, and we have a comfort weight that feels like whether we can identify with. So how we propose that we sort of address this is that we want to reprogram the metabolism. So again, I'm referring to metabolism when I really mean that kind of insulin. We want to make insulin really, really effective by reducing it, by changing the diet. So the key thing there is what we eat matters. And this is part of the problem with calorie counting diets. I don't have anything against calorie counting per se, because actually sometimes that can be the only way to do it for a few days, just to kind of go, okay, how much am I actually eating in terms of portion sizes, to gain some understanding. I don't, think that people should do it for any length of time, but a few days can sometimes be useful, especially when we don't really know what a normal portion is anymore. But the main problem is that we eat too much ultra processed food. Now, we talk about processed food a lot, but without really talking about what it is and what is a moderate amount. And I'm going to tell you something that makes everyone sad, and you're going to feel sad too. And that is that the biggest ultra processed food that we eat actually is bread. All of the bread that you can find in the supermarket is ultra processed. It might say brown, it's still ultra processed. Usually it's just been dyed brown. It might have seeds on it on the outside. Yeah, sure, it's a little bit better than a bagel or something like that, but it's still ultra processed. The process of which bread is made in the UK is a chemical process. It's not been, kneaded and rested for 2 days, etc. So of course you can get proper bread, as in you can get real sourdough, and I'm happy with that. But some sourdough bread are still made with white flours. And the thing about white flours is that, it comes from a grain or it comes from a seed, and that's a start. But when we make it into that flour, we open a flour bag and you can almost breathe it in. It's so fine. Those have become different sugar molecules because they've been chopped up so finely that the body, how it behaves in the body is more like sugar. So if you're having sourdough bread, make sure you're having a really nice whole grain one, and that it's been rested for long enough, because supermarket ones, for example, would just be kind of, call it sourdough. It's had 3 hours of fermentation. You want a really good, I think it's several days, they would be kind of in the fridge overnight, etc., because that's when you start to get the bacteria really creating those changes and creating a sort of a good bread. So bread, a big problem. The other problem with bread is not only is it, white flour, very processed, but also the problem is, of course, we eat it so much. I mean, it tends to be a third of our diets for most people, whether that's in the form of bread or pasta or other type of wheat, noodles, etc. Now, of course, with pasta and noodles and things, we don't eat them on their own, so it tends to be slightly less of a problem. And of course, we don't with sandwiches either, but it tends to be a lot of bread. So the quantity makes a big difference. So that's not to say that you can never eat bread. So it's the type of bread that you're eating, and also it's the ratio with other things. So if we're thinking about the sort of more long-term solutions there, this is just kind of saying, kind of just trying to illustrate that, if you correct the metabolism, you get all these great benefits of restoring metabolism, having less sugar cravings. And that's what we focus on in our programs, restoring the metabolic health. So here are my three things. And this is a little challenge to you to kind of just do this for 3 months. Of course, we've got a holiday season, but like I said, you can still enjoy your holiday, but you can still, especially if we're away somewhere lovely in the Mediterranean, I mean, you can focus on vegetable dishes, fish, beans, etc. So this is a little challenge for 3 months. So just making these three changes. These are the mistakes that most people make, I would say. These are the three biggest mistakes that people make. They eat too much flour, snack too much, and usually people aren't aware of it. I would do a little food diary for a few days and really try not to change your diet during those days, because it's difficult not to. Or most people, when they do food diary, will sort of end up having a slightly better day than they might have, because we got so many exceptions. We might not be a snacker, but there's so many exceptions in our lifestyle, on a weekend that we kind of go, okay, I don't normally have this latte when I'm out with a friend, but I'm out with a friend, So, but actually, because it's not a rare occasion, because it tends to be uh, very frequent. So I'm not saying never have snacks. I'm quite happy for people to have one snack a day, but then kind of almost nil by mouth in between, except for kind of herbal tea and water, which is actually also really good for the digestive system. Snacking can really drive up insulin, and people can feel quite puffy. And kind of, which is a sign of, again, of sort of just too much sugar, and people can feel that quite quickly. So, just have 3 days without snacks and just see, but you might even feel different for 3 days. You might feel like you lose a lot of water. But just a little warning there as well, that if you're used to having a lot of snacks, especially an evening snack, you might find it a little bit hard to sleep in the evening for the first few nights. So if that's you, then just go a little bit more gradually with making the changes. Protein breakfast, I would say savory breakfast, one of the best things you can do for your blood sugar, but also for your kind of glucose levels, your energy levels, and your cravings for the evening. It really makes a big difference to switching the day around. Too many of us have sweet sort of tasting things for breakfast. They'd be better off to be that kind of one snack, or, something that you might have after food, or something that's a bit more of a treat. Now, I'm saying all of this, of course, I've just told you that it's all about not dieting, but I'm also telling you to sort of cut out all of these sort of fun foods. So what I'm saying is that we've got to be aware of what we sort of try, the end goal is, what is it we're trying to achieve? But of course, we know it's hard. All of these foods are, highly addictive, and they're addicted to our metabolism. Our metabolism need and want more because we're having an imbalanced blood sugar. So how we work is that we start with the limiting beliefs and to kind of unlock whatever it is that's holding us back. And this is a real problem, because it's been reinforced for so many years with all of this sort of behavior and, our eating behavior. And the dieting, for example. So we're reinforcing these beliefs that, these foods are so amazing, that we can't live without them. And then we're working on switching the wrong foods to the right foods. We don't kind of just remove things, relearning portions, retraining the brain. And we really go step by step. And the key thing is making things work for you. So a diet is very generic, tends to be very generic. So you've got to find, how does that look for you? If it's going to be sustainable. So say, if that means rye bread, well, if you don't like rye bread, okay, well, what is it that we can do? What are the right steps for you that can actually make it doable for you, and not just a sacrifice? Because as we saw earlier in this presentation, that's just sort of doomed, really, or due to going to fail, at the end. If we're just applying our self-discipline and that's our method, then we're sort of going to find it very hard to stick to it. Yeah, so this is just a little bit about our program, and I wanted to also invite you to have a little free metabolic assessment if you wanted to find where we think your blocks lie. And it could be a combination of insulin resistant and mindset. So there might be some mindset issues that are holding you back. So we apply sort of coaching techniques in our program to unlock those. We also actually do hormone testing and glucose tracking, and really root out anything that's underlying the blockages for you. Like I said, we don't have time to talk about the sort of estrogen and stress hormones, etc., but they do play a role, of course. Here's the little team. So Alexandra in the middle there, she's our weight loss queen, and she runs the programs, which tend to be 3-month programs. I work a lot with sort of inflammation, but in fact, your metabolic state has a really big impact on pain and inflammation, which is why we sort of combine these three sort of specialisms. If your metabolism is unhealthy, if you have high insulin, you've got all of this going on, you're revving up inflammation, and inflammation, of course, means pain. So that's the kind of joint pains, etc. And here is just a few words that I just put in there from some of our old previous clients. And here's the locations where we work. So we're online, but also we're in Queen's Park and in Marylebone in London. And yeah, over to you. So we've got a few minutes for some questions. Let me see if I can